Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about Solana. If you find the information in this video useful, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Now, let's go on ahead and dive right in. All right, starting off, we are going to be looking at the Fear and Greed Index before we get into the main topic of today's conversation, which is Solana. So, as you can see today, we're sitting in fear. The market was sitting at neutral a couple days ago, but has since pulled back, and we're now sitting in fear currently. This is due to overall choppiness in the market. I don't think the market has really decided on a clear direction yet. Given the more recent bearish patterns forming in the market, I think that's why we're sitting here in fear. But one thing I wanted to point out before we continue on is look at the average of the days spent in extreme fear versus neutral versus greed versus extreme greed. I think it's really telling in the sense that if we look, 44%, almost half of all days since this started being tracked, which was January 31st, 2018 is when this chart starts. Just so you're aware, Bitcoin was at $10,100 at that point in time. So it was on the pullback from the 2017 bull run. So it's got a decent bit of history here. What we can see is almost half of the days are spent in extreme fear and fear. Another about 1/4% of the days or over 1/4% are spent in neutral, with only about just over 1/4 of the remaining days spent in greed or extreme greed. Now, the thing that's interesting to note about this is, when this price was being tracked, or when this chart was starting to be tracked, the price was $10,000. The price is now $60,000, or 6 times that for Bitcoin. A lot of the altcoins, it's much, much higher, right? I think it's interesting to note because what we can see is that, the market spends a lot of time in fear, extreme fear, or even just neutral. But when it moves into greed and extreme greed, it's not very often. Now, this shows to me that when the market moves, it moves really hard and really fast. So this is something that we should be paying attention and keeping a note on when we're making decisions of when to buy or sell within the market. So I just want to point that out. Now we'll move on to the main topic of today's conversation, which is Solana. So as we can see here, Solana is kind of in a choppy zone right now. What we can see is there's been no real decided direction in which Solana is moving. As we can see, kind of between the 120 to 129 mark, I would say there's a pretty strong zone of support. We've seen some wicks down in and even below this area, but we haven't actually seen anything hold in or below this area for a sustained amount of time. Same thing to the top side. It looks like we're kind of trending down with lower highs being made kind of throughout. So what this means to me is until we see a break of one of these two, I doubt we're going to see any sort of long-term or sustained move in one direction or the other. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now, at least. The 120 to 129 range to the bottom. And again, kind of going decreasing over time, but anywhere between, like the 182 and, depending on 170 maybe range as we go kind of further to the right. The next thing I wanted to talk about was Solana's standard comparison I think we all see to Ethereum. So this is a chart that is comparing Solana to Ether in terms of price movement. As we can see, I pulled this chart essentially back far enough where we could see the FTX collapse, which was here. If many of you remember, Solana was hit worse than many of the other cryptos during the FTX collapse due to a lot of their connections with FTX and a lot of the, I guess, Sam Bankman-Fried and a lot of the founders and high up people within FTX. This is when Solana came down to the lowest we've seen it really ever since it was, a relatively unknown micro cap coin. It was down in this area. Since then, we've seen Solana make a pretty remarkable comeback through, the end of last year and the beginning of this year. And as we can see, after some of these lows during the FTX collapse, Solana has outperformed Ethereum pretty heavily over the past year or so. We can see, in terms of, the Solana Ethereum dominance, we've seen, Solana come up and, now we're kind of in a choppy area. But overall, it's continuing to make higher highs, higher lows, higher highs, higher lows generally. We can see a general uptrend in the market. So this, I guess, begs the next question, which a lot of people are asking, which is, can Solana flip Ethereum? And if it can, what does that look like? Things like that. So one thing that is important to note, if we jump back to this chart, we can see that Solana's current market cap is about 68 billion. If we look at the fully diluted market cap, they're about 85.5 billion. Well, Ethereum sits around 320 billion market cap currently. So this means anywhere from a 4 to a 5x roughly, depending on which version of the market cap you're looking at. But yeah, we're needing about a 4 to 5x for Solana to essentially catch up and flip Ethereum. I think there's a lot of speculation as to whether Solana can do this. Obviously the ETH maxis think that this is ridiculous, and the Solana maxis think that this is almost guaranteed. It's coded into the script, so to speak. So this is something that will be interesting to see over time. One thing I did want to refer to here is kind of a Solana versus Ethereum comparison. So here we have kind of a quick graph. This is by Quokka Labs. I apologize if I mispronounced that, but this is by Quokka Labs. And what we can see is a quick comparison between Ethereum and Solana. I think there is maybe a bit of a change here that needs to be updated because Ethereum has since moved to proof of stake with their merge. Other than that, this is kind of a minor nuance here. I think most of the rest of this is pretty relevant to where things are. This was written in 2022. So, there's a little bit of some outdated information here, but I think overall and kind of the thesis for both of these, the most outdated thing I think is going to be the total value locked, as this will have increased for both over time. But overall, this kind of provides a general quick breakdown of kind of the differences between the two. So currently, both of them are proof of stake. Architecture, this is more, for like dev people. The programming language, if we look in Solana, it's got Rust, which is the same language that is used for Bitcoin, as well as C and C++, which these are more like, I would say, traditional Web 2 languages, which is encouraging to see. One of the biggest hurdles that I think we're going to have kind of converting people from Web 2 to Web 3 is the necessity to learn new languages. I think maybe a bit of a barrier to entry for some. If we look at Ethereum, we see, they only use Solidity, which is definitely kind of, I would say, the industry standard for Web3 developers at this point in time. Here's where things get a little bit crazy. So you can see the transaction speed on Solana is anywhere between 50,000 and 65,000 transactions per second, where Ethereum is 13 to 15. Now, I'm going to come back to this. We'll continue down the line, but this is something that there's kind of a caveat here. As we can see with transaction costs, this is less than $1. In my experience, this is usually around oftentimes less than a cent or even a cent. So, it's very, very cheap to do here. And then Ethereum, $1 to $50. I mean, I've paid more than this before. It just kind of depends on the congestion in the network. But yeah, the transaction cost for Ethereum can be very substantial. Obviously, this is going to be a little bit outdated as well. But I think that the ratio probably holds similarly true, maybe not exact. Ethereum does have a far more robust development network. I'm sure Solana is catching up at this point in time, but Ethereum does, I think, still control the lion's share of both active developers as well as active dApps on the network. Total value locked, I'll just skip over since this is likely a little bit more outdated. And also, I would imagine that Solana has caught up probably in a very meaningful way. Not quite to the magnitude of Ethereum, but I'm sure that the gap is much closer than what it was at this point in time. So coming back to transaction speed, I want to talk a little bit more about this. So one thing that I'm sure any ETH maxis watching this video are probably already saying is, well, this is not a fair comparison because Ethereum has essentially made the decision where they're pushing a lot of the transaction volume through layer twos. And so most of the transaction volume that happens on Ethereum is actually in layer twos. Think about Polygon, think about Base, think about Arbitrum, think about Optimism, and several others that exist on chain currently. So this number really only considers the layer one, not the layer two capabilities. So, and this is kind of a decision that I think has been made between Solana and Ethereum, is Solana is trying to build a layer one that is very flexible and allows for insanely high transaction speed, where Ethereum has decided to take an alternative route where they want to essentially keep the main layer for hosting of these layer twos, which can then customize the needs of their chain for what they're trying to build for. this is kind of an interesting dynamic because it depends on, it maybe makes Ethereum a little bit more flexible in terms of, are you trying to go for security? Are you trying to go for speed? Are you trying to go for cost? Are you trying to go for some combination of the two or three? This is something that Ethereum, I think, can really improve on, and maybe gives them a little bit more flexibility over time. The other thing that Ethereum can improve on and potentially has an advantage of over Solana is the number of layer twos is potentially infinite, right? There's a lot of layer twos that could spring up on Ethereum and potentially serve, very niche purposes. Where in Solana, while this looks like an incredibly fast, or incredibly high number of transactions per second, one thing that we need to consider is when we get to mass adoption, this is probably not even close to what we're going to need, right? I mean, we're going to be needing, hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of transactions per second if everything were to be done on the Solana chain. Now, you may think that this is not really necessary or feasible, and I would probably agree, but this is something that we also need to consider as well. So, coming back to kind of the difference between Solana and Ethereum lately, one thing I wanted to bring up is kind of I guess, the perception in the market. Solana is making a lot of very good and substantial gains as far as bringing reputable projects who are building really valuable infrastructure and technology. However, I would say up until this point, all of that development and all of that innovation has happened on the Ethereum network. So while Solana is definitely making gains, I would say Solana, at least at this point, is known primarily as the meme chain, due to the fact that it's so cheap to create new tokens and create new abilities to have all of these different sorts of meme coins and high frequency, high velocity transactions that is just not possible on ETH. But you would probably need to go down to a base layer 2 or something like that to find something similar to Solana. But at least thus far, Solana has kind of, I would say, firmly entrenched itself as the meme chain, and memes have been some of the big winners this cycle. Now that's up for discussion whether that was due to Solana or due to meme coins. I think an argument could be made for both. Anyway, to answer the question of can Solana flip Ethereum? In my personal opinion, I would say it's unlikely. However, I would say that it is definitely possible. I think it seems to me that both are kind of coming into their own as kind of unique chains in their own right, and they have the ability to do certain things really well, and that's kind of attracted different crowds and different audiences. I do think that Web3 is a space in which we might be having several layer ones and several layer twos, and right, there's going to be a very customized way of doing things. If we look back to the early internet, AOL was the service provider that was trying to own everything, right? Then it was Yahoo after that. But now if we think about it, the internet doesn't exist like that, right? I mean, there's millions and millions and billions of websites, all that are effectively you could consider as different chains in themselves, right? There's not one website that we go to for everything. There's a whole bunch of different websites that we go to for different specific things. I think if I had to take a guess, this is what blockchain will look like in the future, is that we're going to see a lot of highly specific, very niche use cases for specific chains. And there will be thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, possibly even billions of them to serve each specific need that we're looking for. Anyway, that's all I wanted to go over today. If you found this information useful, please hit the like and subscribe button. It really does help me out. Thank you all, and we'll see you in the next video.